This is Glambition Radio, episode number 198 with Whitney Johnson, Innovation and Disruption Theorist. Welcome to Glambition Radio. I am your host, Allie Brown. I'm an entrepreneur, mentor, investor, and mom of twins. I love thinking big, doing different, and exploring ideas that disrupt the status quo, especially when it comes to women, because we are rewriting the rules for leadership, business success, making money, and changing the world. And we're doing it with style. Let's go. My team and I have been putting together final touches for our first ever meeting for the Trust happening in Miami next week. Getting my spray tan. I'm going to be all set. I have to share how surreal it is seeing this vision come true that I've really had for several years now. And, you know, as excited as I am to launch this, I'm even more excited that the founding members we have so far of this premier global network for 7- and 8-figure women represent great diversity across a wide range of cultures, colors, backgrounds, businesses. We are just naturally attracting the women at the top of their fields who want something different. A few interesting facts I thought you'd appreciate. 11 different states in the US, 4 different countries. Revenues range all the way up to $50 million. And the industries represented span a wide range of categories: leadership coaching, consulting, tech, health and wellness, real estate, book publishing, productivity. I know these ladies are going to be thrilled when they finally meet each other live next week. And we'll be posting some behind the scenes pics from Miami while we're there. And if you're hearing this for the first time for some reason, or you're thinking, my gosh, you know what? I have a friend that I should have told her about this because this is incredible what you're creating, Allie. Send them to jointhetrust.org. They can fill out the brief form. We'll have a brief informational call and they can decide if it's a fit for them. But I just want to give one more big heads up because it's the last chance to become a founding member. And this meeting will not be repeated. We are really setting the course for where this is going to go. So I hope to see you there. All right. Our guest today, speaking of uncharted territory. So Whitney Johnson invited me on her podcast called Disrupt Yourself last year. And you know what? I was disrupted. She was awesome. And the more I learned about her, I was really excited to dig into her work. And I feel like I've been a bit Whitnified, if that is a new word, Whitney. I've been Whitnified because now I can't get enough of her stuff. She's one of the 50 leading business thinkers in the world on the Thinkers 50 list. She's an expert helping high-growth organizations develop high-growth individuals. She has several books. She's an award-winning author, keynote speaker. When I say keynote speaker, I mean speaking at top events. She goes and lectures the people at Harvard Business School. She's an executive coach, advisor to CEOs. She also founded the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Harvard's Clayton Christensen and led an $8 million seed fund for Korea's Coupang company, currently valued at $9 billion. And sad note that I first learned about Clayton Christensen from her on this interview, and he just passed. So really amazing thought leader and innovative thinker. You should check his stuff out as well. And get your pen and paper out for this one. So many little gems are going to pop out at you and you'll be like, oh, I need to get that down. Okay. Leadership lessons, management lessons, decisions she made, just really interesting points along the way that should not be taken lightly. Enjoy this powerful conversation with Whitney Johnson. Whitney, I would like to know where you are right now.
I am in Salt Lake City, Utah, in a Marriott Townhill Suites hotel.
How's the food? How's that free breakfast?
Well, I don't eat breakfast. I actually do intermittent fasting. I have some people say to me it's the healthiest thing you can do on the planet, and other people say to me it's very unhealthy.
I do it too.
You do it too.
Yes, so I'm starting to get hangry. It's about 10 o'clock.
Yes, for me too. What I will tell you when you ask me how the food is, one of the things I love about being in Salt Lake is it has my favorite restaurant of all time. It's called Red Iguana. It's on North Temple in between the airport and downtown. Mexican food is my comfort food. And so I eat there pretty much every day when I'm in town.
I'll put that in my little black book of Mexican restaurants because I'm a fan as well. So I'll make it out there. And I'm glad you're not eating at the Marriott. So good for you. Get out and enjoy the town. Now, where do you live? Do you live there full time or you're well, no, you're in a Marriott, so you don't live there. Or do you live in Marriotts?
Yeah. Do I live in Marriott? Well, my status would suggest that I do, but actually I live in Lexington, Virginia, which is a very rural town about 3 hours driving southwest of Washington, D.C. It's best known for Washington and Lee University, Virginia Military Institute, and Southern Virginia University. And so we teach there. We live there because my husband's an academic.
Ah, okay. It sounds beautiful. So, my first experience with you was really, learning about you because of your show and the Disrupt Yourself podcast. And I was thrilled to be on it. It was a great episode, but I really didn't know who you were. I had to poke around and learn more about you. Once I uncovered you, I'm like, who is this woman? She's won like every award you could have. She lectures at Harvard, lectures at Harvard. I want you all to take that in. Goes in and tells Harvard people what they should be doing. Like, that's how I view that. You're one of the 50 most influential management thinkers in the world. How did you become this Whitney Johnson? Like, how did this all happen?
Oh, I love that question, Allie. Before we go there, though, can I just comment on your coming on my podcast? And then I'll tell you my story.
Sure.
Because I think it's really, to all your listeners, I had Allie on our podcast. It's called Disrupt Yourself. And what was so fun for me is at the end of the year, I'll poll my team and I'll be like, okay, so what was your favorite episode? What was the most impactful? And one of the people on my team, in fact, I'm going to say her name, just give her a shout out. Her name is Emily Davis. And she listened to the podcast. She's like, Whitney, this was by far the most impactful. So she's a freelancer, 1099, doesn't work for me full time. But as a consequence of listening to your podcast, Allie, she went out, she rented office space. She decided that she was going to become a certified story brand consultant. Like, she was like, I'm going to shoot. I'm going big because I listened to Allie. So I just wanted to let you know you influenced yet another person. And I thought it would be fun for your listeners to be able to hear that.
I love that. And I think that's good for all of us to hear too. Because, we do a lot of these things. And then in the end of the day, you're like, I hope someone heard that. You know what I mean? And I hope someone heard that it made a difference to them. And so I love that. And by the way, all of you listening, let Whitney know, let me know. Like, if you like these shows, we get some feedback, but like when we get like a real beautiful piece of feedback like that, like something that made an impact, take a minute. And I think we need to do that for each other more. It made a big difference. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And now that you said that, I'm like, she needs to leave a podcast review so that you know that. So anyway, awesome. All right. Now I will stop deflecting and actually answer the question that you just answered me, which is how did I
politician
end up doing what I'm doing? So just from a background perspective, and I guess I'll give you a little bit of detail. I grew up in California in what is now known as Silicon Valley, although it wasn't, Silicon Valley at the time. Very middle class background, oldest of 4 children. Did a lot of things that girls in the, 70s and 80s did, which is, got good grades. I was a cheerleader in high school because that was kind of the top of the pecking order at the time. Girls didn't really do sports. I studied music, went to college, and had some sort of vague notion that I was going to be a wife and a mother, and sort of that's kind of where it ended. And then I got to college and studied music and still had this vague notion of that's what I was going to do when I grew up. But then I got married and we moved to New York. My husband was getting his PhD in microbiology at Columbia University. We needed food on the table. Someone needed to provide that food, and it turned out that person was me. And then something wonderful happened, which is started going to work. I worked on Wall Street. Because I was a woman, because I was a music major, because I knew no one, because I had never set foot in a business course, my first job was as secretary to a stockbroker. I would go to work every day. I would hear all the, up and coming stockbrokers who happened to all be men saying things as they were trying to open accounts, pressure super intense. This is like Liar's Poker, Bonfire of the Vanities era. Say things like, throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And first I was kind of offended because, as you just heard, I was a cheerleader in high school. But as I heard this over and over again and realized, I'm going to be working at least 5 years. My husband's PhD, it is going to take at least 5 years. It turns out it took 7. Why would I make X when 10X is a possibility? And then deep down, somewhere in this deep part of myself, I was like, I'm just as smart as these guys. I know I am. And so it was time for me to throw down my pom-poms. And that's why I think this was a magical moment, because I would not have known to call it this then, but that was the beginning of me disrupting myself. I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics. I was fortunate enough to have a boss who was willing to help me grow. And so he moved me from a secretary to investment banker. And for any of you listening, financial services, professional services, that is a wide divide. It does not get bridged. And yet it did. I then moved I was in banking. Then I got disrupted a little bit, had 2 children, which is very big disruption.
They are disrupting. We love them, but they're disrupting.
Yeah, we love them, but disrupting in all the best ways, right? They make us this silly little thing so that we can take over certainly our world from a character development standpoint. I then did equity research where I was picking stocks, putting buys and sells on stocks, and then read The Innovator's Dilemma. Very formative book for me. It's by Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School about how this silly little thing can take over the world, like Toyota did to General Motors and Netflix did to Blockbuster and Uber's doing to cabs. And I thought this can apply to people.
The Innovator's Dilemma. Okay.
The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen.
Yeah.
So I'm on Wall Street. Then I leave to become an entrepreneur. I connect with Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School. So I've read his book and now I connect with him. I start this investment fund with him. And now, mind you, this is all over the span.
Wait, stop. You can't just breeze over. And then I left and became an entrepreneur. That must have been can we back up? Because this is what I love. So, I mean, you seem very, trying to think, you're hard to describe. So, you were going up the ranks in a very, specific way. Like, they were like, first you do this and then you do this. It just kind of happened that way. So that going to becoming an entrepreneur, that was like what we call the sharp right turn. Sharp right turn. Where did that come from? Like, what made you say, I'm going to go off on my own? And what even was that? How did that happen?
Oh, I love that, Allie. Sharp right turn. Okay, yeah. So I say disrupt yourself. You say sharp right turn, right? Tomato, tomato. Okay, so I love that. Okay, so here's what happened. It's 2003, 2004, and there's a confluence of factors. And I think this is what happens. One is I had read The Innovator's Dilemma, which I just mentioned. Another is that I had gone to my boss and I had said, hey, I want to do something new. I had now been an institutional investor ranked equity analyst, top of my game for about 4 or 5 years. So I was feeling kind of this need to jump to a new S-curve, as I would describe it. My boss said to me, really? No, really. We like you right where you are. So I needed to just keep doing what I was doing if I was going to stay there. I think in retrospect, there was some glass ceiling stuff kicking in, although I didn't sort of recognize it or certainly didn't acknowledge it. I think that I was a bit burned out. I was traveling all the time. We now lived in Boston because my husband was working in Boston. Our children were 8 and 4 respectively.
Oh. Yeah.
And then also this was kind of, on the heels of the .com era. So this idea of entrepreneurship and a brand called You, that was all kind of surfacing. And
oh, yeah. I kind of forgot about the brand called You. Yeah,
of course not, by Tom Peters, which I love. And so I think all of those things bubbling up, there was a little bit of that pull of I want to go do something new, but a lot of it was a push. And there just this sense, and this goes back to why Innovator's Dilemma was was so meaningful for me is as I'm reading that, I'm having this kernel of an idea that disruption, it is not just about products. It's not just about companies and countries. It's about people. And that if I was going to do whatever it was, I felt like I was meant to do. And we sometimes are clear on that. And more often than not, there's this vague notion of, I know there's more. I was going to have to, in your language, take that sharp right turn. So it's influence of things. In retrospect, it was probably a bit foolhardy. Like I walked away from a really big salary. I didn't necessarily have a plan. And sometimes you can't have a plan because it would just be too scary to kind of come up with a plan. And so I just did it. I just jumped and did a bunch of kind of like, let's do this. I think I'll try that. But I didn't necessarily have a plan of initially I was going to build a media empire, actually, Allie, like you have done. I did not, but that was like this idea in my head. But anyway, so that's what was happening inside of my.
Wow. I just can't imagine you not having a plan. Like you seem like a planning woman. And this is what I love because everyone's looking at where you were probably and being like, wow, she's successful. She's wearing these, great suits. She's Wall Street. I mean, it was like the whole financial dream, right? And then you were starting to get these little inklings like that you wanted to be somewhere else. And I love that. And so what did you go off and do exactly? The media company, that was the vision. But what were your first steps? What did you tell people that you were doing this? Did you ask for, connections were you doing consulting? What was it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the foolhardy part of like, I'm going to go do this thing. And I'm being a little bit unfair. I had written a children's book, which ended up not getting published. That's okay. We had this idea. So now this is 2004. One of the companies that I followed as an equity analyst was Televisa, which is in Mexico. And they're basically, at the time, they were like ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox combined. Like they were the juggernaut from a media perspective. And so American Idol is at its zenith. I have a friend. We had this idea, like, what if you did American Idol for soccer? We pitched it to Televisa. It was a great idea, but they didn't do it. And I think in the parlance of disruption, they were just too fat and happy, right? It just didn't make sense to take a risk. But I had that idea. So there was just all these sort of, I wanted to say resurgence, but a surging of ideas and things that we can try. So those are some of the things that we did. My husband and I backed someone who wanted to start a magazine that initially did really well, and then it didn't work. And so there was just a lot of low end of the curve. Let's try a bunch of stuff and see what happens. And it was during that period that I connected with Clayton. And so like a year and a half later, I was doing some volunteer work for him and with him for our church, connected with him. He wants to start a fund, hasn't ever invested. His son's just graduating from business school. And so he asked me, do you want to partner and start this fund? And so that's how that ended up happening.
A few years prior. Did you get in touch with him, or this happened just very kind of serendipity?
No. I mean, we like to yes. Okay. Let us vanquish any thought of I just somehow got super lucky. I mean, we all have some luck and good timing, but I remember before I even left, I reached out to him and I said, hey, here's an equity research report I wrote. I'd love to get better acquainted. I started courting him. Yeah,
in a professional business way.
Stalked him.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And what's funny, Allie, is that when I left, people said to me, well, you could go back and work on Wall Street and do other stuff. And my husband certainly thought that was the more prudent thing to do. But here's how I knew I was done, is that all my financial models that I had built in Excel, I took none of them with me. None.
Wow.
Cut the ties, burn the boats. We are not going back.
Yeah. So tell me about the Disruptive Innovation Fund.
Yeah. So we launched that in 2007, did that for 5 years. I sold my stake in 2012 and, pivoted again. But what we basically did is we said, let's take this theory of disruption that he's written about in Innovator's Dilemma and use this to invest. And so one of the things that, Clay had seen is that, he had gone long Netflix and short Blockbuster and had made money. So why don't we use this theory and apply it? And so we started this fund. It was kind of this unusual hybrid fund where we were investing not only in publicly traded securities, but then also early stage startups. And so our biggest sort of exciting thing that, at least from, the time that I was there, is we invested in a company called Coupang. It's in Korea. It was basically basically kind of Amazon of Korea, where we were in the seed round. And the last time there was a valuation, it was worth over $5 billion. So that was kind of exciting that we were so early in that company.
What was the evolution? Today, when I look at what you've created, I mean, you're doing services, you're working with companies, you're helping incredible, teams of people. That the level that you work on with corporate is incredible. But you personally, where do you feel you really stepped into thought leadership?
I love that question, Allie. So I think what I would say is that in 2012, I wrote an article that was in the Harvard Business Review called Disrupt Yourself. And I think that's probably the moment where I put my stake in the ground. But for everybody who's listening, if you start to look at the timeline, I first started looking at these ideas in 2004, 2005. I leave Wall Street. I connect with Clay in 2006. We do the fund for 5 years. So it took about 6 or 7 years for those ideas to germinate to the point that I published that article, Disrupt Yourself. And before that, I had written a book called Dare, Dream, Do that was really geared toward women of like, hey, I had this dream. I did this. Now I want you to go out and dream. So in some ways, maybe a precursor or kind of alongside of what you've done, Allie, but this idea of exploring the tension between women wanting to be both a ship and a harbor, and what does that look like, and how do you get your dreams done? So I'd written that book, but that was more sort of this autobiographical cup of hot chocolate. It wasn't thought leadership at this point for me. So I would say that I started to step into it when I wrote that article, Disrupt Yourself. It was very popular. I started to have people say to me, would you like to come speak? Started to speak. And then finally, by 2015, I had my publisher say, you probably better write a book on this topic. And so I wrote the book in 2015. So basically, for the last 7, now we're moving on to 8 years, I pivoted again of moving from being an investor to a thought leader and a coach and a consultant. So that's what I do now. But that's, I would say when it started was that stake in the ground with that article in 2012.
When I'm working with clients who are they are thought leaders, but sometimes they haven't come out publicly with what they should be saying. I love this because I tell them just start with a blog post. Start with something, but you have to make it very opinionated. Take a position on something. Do you feel like you did with that? Or was it just information no one had heard? It was just a new concept. What was it so pivotal about that article?
Oh, Allie, when you said that, you just reminded me of an experience that I had that I think is really critical to this. And then I'll finish answering that question. I remember when I was working on Wall Street, I had become an equity research analyst and I was about to launch coverage of my very first stock. So, done all the industry research, writing the report. And I had to say, is this going to be a buy or is this going to be a sell or is it going to be basically a hold? And I was so angsty. What should it be? I don't know. Is it a buy? Is it a sell, et cetera? I finally had a colleague say to me, Whitney, stop being a shrinking violet. And it was right in the stomach, but it's exactly what I needed because I realized up until that point, and I am now in my mid-30s, up until that point, I had never really had an opinion. I had not been willing to say, this is what I think. And knowing that the only safe harbor that I or you or anyone will ever have is our convictions. And so that was the beginning. And I remember realizing that this job of being an analyst, the most important thing I needed to learn was to have an opinion and have a view. And so that's now in the backdrop, right? That's 2004-ish. And so fast forward a couple years later, I would say the very first blog post I wrote, this is in 2006, it was called daretodream.typepad.com. For probably a couple of years, I didn't really know what I had to say. Like I was writing to figure out what I had to say. So to build on your advice, I agree. And if you can come out and have an opinion immediately, then good for you. But if you can't, start writing anyway. Because in that process of writing, you will figure out what you have to say and allow that to be iterative. So So again, some of you are capable of doing that. I wasn't initially. I didn't know quite what I thought, but I knew that if I would start writing, I would figure it out.
And take comfort in the fact that men post opinions every day. It is, no problem. Right. And it's funny. It's, I have friends who are experts in this, and they say it's because we used to be burned at the stake. This is all new for us, really. I mean, when you think in the timeline of history, it's a whole other show.
Right.
But, it's fascinating. It's literally in our DNA, like that fear. And I mean, it's a different journey for us. And it literally is in our blood and who we are. And so it's always for me a turning point when I'm working with a client when they are ready to come out and take a position on something. Because typically it's something they've been sharing with their clients or team. And I'm like, all right, this is real thought leadership. It's not just posting all day on Facebook and LinkedIn. Like, this is you claiming that here is your opinion, your position on something. So I love that came out, because I was curious, like, if the book just happened. And no, it was that moment of you saying, I'm going to write an article on what I think is happening, what people should be doing. And, you're giving your advice. And now you have several books, you have a consulting company. Tell us what is going on right now for you this year in 2020.
Yeah. So in late 2019, we published a second edition of the book Disrupt Yourself that we've been talking about with Harvard Business Press. And so that's been good to republish that, include, podcast episodes that apply to the ideas. What we're doing in 2020 is working on our next book. In fact, as soon as we're finished speaking, I'm going to talk to one of my editors and continue brainstorming and thinking about that. So that's one big initiative that we have going this year. And then the second big piece is really figuring out how to expand the reach of our podcast. Like, what does that look like? How do we continue to improve the quality of the sound, of the editorial, et cetera, and just continue to grow that? So those are the two big things that we're focused on. And then of course there's the continuing process of working inside of corporations and certifying, coaches to be able to teach this material and coach around this material and license it in organizations. But that's more ongoing. I think the sort of what's new, it's working on this next book and expanding the reach of the podcast.
Tell me about the certifications, because we do have many women listening who may be in the consulting field or coaching, and business is changing so quickly. And I know that many women are going through some changes in their business right now. Maybe this is something they'd be interested in.
Oh, sure. Thank you for asking. So what we found is that a lot of people really resonate with these ideas of personal disruption, of the 7 accelerants, of how you are able to do that effectively and successfully, and then the S curve of learning frameworks that help us understand how we grow and give people these mental models for understanding where they are in the growth process in a role as an entrepreneur, et cetera. And so we have a certification process. It's the Disruption Advisor certification that allows you to then be certified as one of our coaches. And then when we have, we get a lot of inbound demand for, I need a coach for X, Y, or Z, then you end up becoming, one of our preferred partners to be able to help people coach around transition, whether it's for them personally or inside of an organization.
Brilliant. Where can they learn more about that?
Probably on that one, the best thing to do is just to email me at wj@whitneyjohnson.com, and I will connect you with my team and we can give you more information.
Very smart to create the certification. I think that's brilliant.
Thank you.
I actually have to tell you, I was most interested in your book on team, which just came out last year, I believe.
Yeah. In 2018.
You're right.
So now it's
2 years. But yeah, 2020. Hello.
Yeah.
I'm still signing. By the way, I feel funny even saying this, but occasionally I do sign a check, still paper check, and I'm still writing 19. Remember, the younger people don't know what I'm talking about. They don't get this. So yeah,
no, they don't.
It's for the cleaners, you write the check, and okay. And I wrote 19.
Exactly.
So when I was looking at that, I was particularly interested in, I'm growing a team again. I went through some evolutions with team. I had grown my company to Inc. 500 prior. We had 15 to 20 employees at one point. And then then had my kids and decided to make that sharp right turn for me and redesign the business for what I wanted it to be for a few years. Like, it was incredible. And I was ready for a change. Got to the point that that was just the best option. Now I'm rebuilding my team again in a very different way. By the way, it was interesting. Last time we did it all virtual. I just wanted to work virtually. And now I'm hiring full-time local. They're here with me. We have a home that has some bedrooms converted to offices. Like, it's awesome. So I was particularly interested in your advice on team and hiring. And if you could give us some ideas, especially for, the women listening who maybe are starting to grow their first team really under them, right? Full-time employees, like really doing this correctly and not just hiring the VA overseas. What's your advice right now in hiring good people?
Yeah. So what we've done, with this book is it's basically, if you're a manager, an entrepreneur, you're trying to build a team, this book walks you through how to structure a team. And the sort of ideological underpinning of this is that everyone is on an S curve, including you. And so you can kind of picture in your mind, you've got, the base of the S where growth is slow, and then you move into the sweet spot, that steep part of the S where, you know enough, but not too much. And you're in hyper growth in terms of your learning around the role that you're in. And then there's this high part of the S. And once you get to the high end of the S, because you're no longer learning, growth can slow down. You're not getting those dopamine hits. You start to get bored. And so you need to jump to the bottom of a new S. So you learn and you leap and you repeat. And so one of the things that we explain when you're thinking about how to construct a team is to understand that every single person on your team is on an S curve, including you, and to understand where they are on the S curve, because depending on where they are, whether they're on the launch point in the sweet spot or at the high end, they need very different things from you. On the launch point, they need a lot of support. They need tightly scoped assignments, lots of feedback. In the sweet spot, they need you to focus. They need you to help them focus, and they need you to focus on them and not say they're doing great, I'll leave them be, they're not a problem child. And at the high end, the tendency is to be like, they're so good at what they do, I just need them to keep doing that forever. And the thing they need from you is a challenge, because if you don't challenge them, that plateau becomes a precipice. And that's where you start to lose people. Yeah. So there's that. You start with this idea of an S curve, but then it gets even better, because what we're seeing as we administer our S curve locator that identifies where people are on the S curve, we're seeing that you build a team that can grow, that can innovate by optimizing the S curves, by having at any given time about 70% of your team. So let's say you have a 10-person team. You want to have 6 or 7 people in your sweet spot as much as possible. You want to have 1 or 2 people at the high end of that S, and maybe they're a consultant that you brought in, they're a ringer, they know how to do something really well, or not, but you always need at least 1 or 2 people that just know how to do things, because they can bring other people along that S curve. But then you also need 1 or 2 people who are on the launch point of the S curve. And I'm not just talking about college graduates. I'm just talking about people who are new to these ideas, because they ask questions like, well, why do we do it like this? Because they're not blinded by the familiar. And those are the questions that open the door to innovation, to you doing things and staying fresh. Because what the risk always is, if you have too many people at the high end, then because they're not enjoying the feel-good effects of learning, they're bored, and bored people either leave or they just get complacent, and bored and complacent people, they don't innovate, they get disrupted. So as you're thinking about constructing this team, you can say, okay, where are my people on the S curve? Depending on where they are, what do they need from me? And if I want a team that can innovate, I'm going to optimize those curves. So it basically gives you this language. Every organization needs a language to grow. It's like this vine. It gives you something to attach to. The S curve helps every individual take responsibility for their learning. But then as a leader, as an entrepreneur, it gives you a language and framework, this artifact to talk about with your people in terms of developing them.
You just gave me like exactly what I needed. That's actually quite brilliant. Yeah. And you know what's so funny? You were saying how it's good to have people in the starting phase. We don't want to call it beginner or new, or I don't know what you call it. Yeah, launch point. That's a nice way to say it. And this is where, as the boss, we need to be very patient in the launch point process. But you know what's great? Something just happened like a week ago on my team. There was something we were doing in our process, and we've been doing it for like 3 years, and suddenly it wasn't working. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was the process wasn't translated correctly, or what happened in the training, or whatever. But what's wild is, at first I'm like, well, just, figure out, make it work. And suddenly I'm like, no, let's stop doing this thing. Let's stop doing this thing, because I don't think we actually need to do this thing anymore. it got me to question, like, is that thing even working? Is the ROI in this thing we've been doing for 2 or 3 years even worth it? Have we looked at exactly who the target market is we're using for this method? Like all this, and it just was so good that happened, actually, because it got us to step back and question the validity of the task, and then actually go, okay, where can we put our budget elsewhere until like we get more information on this and redo it. So it's good that happens. And actually in my coaching groups, it's good to have women at different levels for that same reason. You just helped me realize, because the ones who are, like around $1 million or on the verge, like they have really good questions and really good problems that are good for the women at the higher end to remember those kinds of problems, because it gets you to revisit like why you're doing what you're doing things simply, keeping it basic. So I think this could be applied to even more things. And that good old S-curve, man, it just won't go away,
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting too, Allie, is that one of the things that we're actually doing is that you want, from a coaching perspective, you want people to be on the launch point, the sweet spot, and the high end in your cohorts. Like it does, like you said, it just translates into a lot of different scenarios. One comment that I want to make, that I loved what you just said about the person who's on the launch point of the S-curve. I said, they ask questions like, why do we do it like this? But what you just said and brought out an insight, something I hadn't thought of, is that because they're new, they're interacting with an environment that is new to them. So they're not going to know sort of how everybody did it. And because of that, their mere existence, not even the questions that they're asking, the mere existence is going to, as you said, tell you where the bugs are in the code. And so what do we need to do with that? So I love that you brought that up and helped, give that insight. So thank you.
Live right now. It's Whitney Johnson and Allie Brown. This has been fantastic. And we could do a whole other show, probably part 2. I would love to wrap up with your three of your best pieces of advice for everyone.
Yes, I have 3. Obviously, one could go on and on. But so the first piece of advice I would say is that remember that everyone's on an S-curve of learning, including you, and that you can build high-performing teams by managing and coaching to the curve, as well as teams and organizations that can grow by optimizing those curves. So that's kind of a wrap-up of what we said, this idea of learn, leap, and repeat. The second 2 pieces of advice are a little bit more personal. One is to be in your body. Like, be in your body. And what I mean when I say that, when you are having a conversation with someone, when you're saying something, notice how you feel. Like, does it, like, almost like if someone was singing, like, does it resonate? I've been doing that recently of like, how do I feel right now? Like, what experience is my body having? How is my body interacting to the conversation that I'm having? And just being aware of that. So that's my second piece of advice. That's kind of this nascent advice for me. So I share it with you, but I'm finding that it's really a valuable thing because we tend to disconnect the two. And then the third piece of advice is to smile at people. It's such an act of vulnerability when we are willing to smile at people that haven't yet smiled at us. I remember when I was a young, girl, and probably even in my 20s, I wanted to smile so badly, but it was just so frightening to me to do that because it would make me feel vulnerable. What if they didn't smile back? And so one of the things I'm thinking about, though, is now one of the biggest gifts that I can give, or any of us can give, is when we're walking down the street or we are interacting with anybody, is just to smile at them. It's such a kind, warm, thoughtful thing to do, is just to smile. And so that would be my third piece of advice, is to smile.
Sweet and unexpected. I like that. The world needs more smiling right now. Well, goodness, doesn't it? So I appreciate that. So everyone go check out whitneyjohnson.com, pick up her books. I'm going to be digging into that team book, and I'll get back to you on more of the insights I have on that. Fantastic. And I'd love to meet you in person one day. I hope we can connect.
Oh, I would love that. Let's make that happen.
All right. Thanks, Whitney. Have a great day.
Thank you, Allie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Glambition Radio. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe so you automatically get new shows every week. And I'd love if you left us a review. We are on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and other platforms. And I'd love to hear from you. Come join the conversation online. You'll mostly find me on Instagram, but also on Facebook, Twitter, and more. Just head to alliebrown.com. You will find them all there. And you can also learn about upcoming opportunities to meet in person. Glambition Radio is the elevated conversation for women leaders, and I'm honored you've tuned in.